Welcome to this edition of Excavating the Bible, what archaeology can teach us. This program is dedicated to exploring the contributions of Middle Eastern archaeology to our understanding of and appreciation for the Bible. I'm Doug Clark. I direct the Center for Near Eastern Archaeology at La Sierra University in Riverside, California. I'm joined by someone else with a long history at La Sierra University, Associate Director of the Center and President for several years at the university, and a longtime archaeologist, Larry Garrity. And we welcome Dr. Sten LaBianca, who is a professor of anthropology, Associate Director of the Institute of Archaeology at Andrews University, to join us. We want to talk about globality and desired pasts. That's intriguing already, Stan, and we'll want to get into that. But first of all, your background is in anthropology. What has that meant to you as you have now put, what, 4 decades professionally into archaeology? Yeah. What has that meant for you to have studied anthropology, and where has that led you?
Well, you know, anthropologists study daily life. And many of the things that are written in the Bible and in other texts are written by the elite. And so anthropology gives you a window on how people live their daily lives. And thus it complements, works beautifully together with the text as a way to fill in the background. So I think that that's one of the most important ways that anthropology can contribute to our understanding, not just of the biblical, but of the Roman and the later past as well.
Now, we are all, I was going to say aging together. There must be a more elegant way to say that.
Others.
Yes, well, graying together maybe. That's it. And we are thinking that in a couple of years, we'll be looking at 50 years, a half century of work in the Middle East.
Yeah.
In 2018, that will be our 50th anniversary. And we've been thinking about how to shape that 50th anniversary in our publications and presentations. And we've thought about something, and I want us to talk about that for a minute, and then let's have some definitions, okay? What have we thought about as a kind of an angle that would connect the past, biblical past, as well as all of the past that we deal with, and the modern world, and belief, and Bible, and so on. So what sort of direction are we thinking of taking?
Well, actually, I'm going to defer to Dr. Garrity because really the direction we've thought about comes out of what he has contributed to the site. Just by introducing your comment, I want to say, Larry, that I think that archaeology is far more than just studying the past. And the Manaba Plains project, I think, has really illustrated that very well. So why don't you just talk about your broader vision for being involved, not just for the sake of the past, but what else?
Right. When we got started, Siegfried Horn's dream was to excavate a biblical site that we could connect with the stories in the Bible and show how they related. And as we went on, we realized that we were sitting on something that was, in a way, more important and more broad. And we began getting acquainted with the people that lived in the land, and we had all these foreigners that came to participate. And we began more interaction. We began to build bridges between the people who live there now. We were uncovering the past for the people who lived long ago. We were able to introduce them, you know, to their forebears and so forth. And then we began to introduce new methods. And we looked for ways to tell the story in such a broad way that it would be useful not just for our original purpose, but for many purposes. And so we began to build all kinds of bridges with specialists and with visitors and with the residents. And so we've got a much broader, richer story to tell now.
The fact is that tourists and others, when they come to these sites, they often come with a particular idea of what they're going to find. And you know, Mark Twain said it better than anybody here in this great book, The Innocents Abroad. Back already in 1869, he writes, "I am sure that many who have visited Palestine in years gone by were Presbyterians and came seeking evidences in support of their particular creed. They found a Presbyterian Palestine, and they had already made up their minds to find no other, though possibly they did not know it, being blinded by their zeal. Others were Baptists, seeking a Baptist Palestine. Others were Catholics, Methodists, Episcopalians, seeking evidences endorsing their several creeds, and a Catholic, a Methodist, and Episcopalian Palestine. This idea that there are many different paths you really see in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Right.
Because there you have curators representing all these different traditions. And sadly, there's a lot of conflict between these
Christian groups.
Christian groups about the past. And we've experienced that working in Jordan as well. We came animated by a particular past, a biblical past. Of course it means a lot to us. We are Bible-reading Christians. But in that same site, there's a very rich Islamic history. Should we just bulldoze that away?
Some people have.
Some people have.
But we didn't.
So given that we have a site that actually spans these 3 millennia, it's insufficient to merely come with one focus on one period. We need to find a narrative that a Chinese who has no connection to any of those faiths would find relevant. And that brings us to the idea of globality.
Well, let me ask a couple of definitions first. And these would be quick definitions, and then we'll illustrate them. And we have to look at something on the table here first. But desired past.
Right.
That's what you were just reading about. So where does that language come from?
Well,
you go looking for something that you want to find.
That you long for.
That you long for. And many ways you find it, whether it's there or not,
exactly.
Unfortunately.
And actually, we who work in the land of the Bible, and who have a constituency who love the Bible, we are under enormous pressure, you could say, to make that connection to the Bible. But when others look at, for example, the Sunni population of Jordan, look at what our primary focus is, they can get a little bit nervous, especially because the past has been used to build governments, to support national identity and so forth. So we've had to tread very carefully and find a way forward that allows us to present the biblical and the other past, but within a broader framework.
And I have to say this, that I think we have a reputation for being honest with the evidence.
Yes.
We have admitted when the desired past was not
our
found,
desired
when
past.
our desired past was not found. And we've said, look, we've got to look at for some new explanations here, because what we expected to find, what we wanted to find wasn't found. And that has given us credibility and a reputation for being trustworthy in the way we interpret it.
We've always had on our teams professors from many other universities where the passion for the biblical past has not necessarily been there, but they have been very excellent in their expertise that they bring to it, and they've kept us honest.
That's
right. That's right. And that's why I do like the notion of good news, which we would immediately say, okay, Bible, archaeology, they like each other, they agree. But then I would say, not only do we have good news, but we have potentially good news. Because we now can discover, even if it was frightful, even if it was discouraging, even if it cut off funding from a particular source of desired past, we have to be true and honest. But let's find out what there is more with new windows of opportunity. Another term, globality. Where does that come from? What does it mean?
Well, the term, of course, means a perspective as seen from space. You know, the first to really see Earth from space were the astronauts. And they were impressed with the whole of the Earth. Now, as mortals living in a particular region, we feel we belong at best to a country and maybe to a Western or a Islamic or a Hindu civilization. And that's kind of how people lived most of their lives in the past. But today we live in an age where all these civilizations are coming into contact.
Can be seen at once.
It can be seen at once. And we are facing an enormous challenge of coming to build bridges between ourselves. And therefore, the effort now underway in our project is to tell the story of our region as if it were a window on the history of humanity in the Eastern Mediterranean. And we have one very exciting window because we have a long historical period with both written records and archaeology, and so many important things in the story of all of humanity occurred in our region. Not the least, the birth of the biblical past, but the birth of the empires that were part of the story of both the Bible and history, and the impulses that led to the present condition. So globality is a new lens through which to look at the region that we are in, that gives relevance to all the archaeological biblical sites, but as part of something bigger.
And now what we have to do with the artifacts in front of us, although these come from a very small region, most of these are from the West Bank, from Palestine, that if you're thinking globality, that is a very small region, but it is traditional archaeology. And we learn a lot from these. These are mostly Iron Age, so we're talking Old Testament, time of the kings. Those are Roman period, time of the New Testament, have different sorts of artifacts. But now, Sten, what you're asking us to do is step back, maybe catch a flight to the space station and step back, way back, and look at this in a larger context. So let's look at a couple of slides and let's indicate kind of how we go about this, because we're going to be thinking about globality and desired passengers. Another word, another term, cultural memory, we might want to tuck in here as well. Okay, so what do we have, Sten?
Well, the Levant is a term that actually you hear a lot today because of ISIS. They have that term
in their title.
But it's a term that's been used for well over 100 years to refer to the Eastern Mediterranean, to the lands that border the Mediterranean from Egypt up to Turkey. And this is, of course, part of the larger Fertile Crescent, but it's a very special area because there are all over the globe, you have Christians, Jews, and Muslims who have an attachment to this area, who have a longing for this area. And of course, that is part of why it's also a conflicted area. And it's in that complex world that we have to narrate the past of our sites. And trying to do that in a way that is both affirming to the different pasts, even as we alert to a common past, which is our human project of surviving in a world of contested pasts.
Right. And the kind of perspective now allows us to kind of to move over as well as back and see different angles. What does it do, though, when a desired past ends up really threatened? Like some discovery or series of discoveries that really deteriorates what one hoped for, the Presbyterian or the Baptist or the Methodist or whatever. So how do we grapple with that? Maybe this globalization, this globality, is really the solution, because it allows a wider picture.
It does, and we come back to what Dr. Geraghty mentioned at the beginning about our role in building bridges. And one of the things that actually Mark Twain mentions as well, and that is that travel is very hard on prejudices, because it opens you up to realize that there are many ways to be human. And therefore, over the last 50 years, we have probably brought over 2,000 people to the Middle East who have come to personally sit in the tents and receive the hospitality of the wonderful Jordanian partners that we have, met Muslims, Arabs, and they go back and interpret the culture to their own villages and towns, who often are very fearful, and help. Our challenge is to break down this discourse about fear. And we are going this summer.
Yes.
All of us. You're taking 2 trips to the Middle East. I'm taking a group of students.
2.
And we are not going to be intimidated by the news from the region. And so, to me, one of the really important roles that we have as archaeologists is to maintain that connection and to even be part of the solution by creating opportunities for people to really come to know each other in a close
bridge
way.
building,
Bridge building,
which is the theme of our, kind of the narrative of Bridge building,
Right.
the theme of our 50th anniversary.
Yes.
And we listened, Larry and I did, to a lecturer a few months ago who's a longtime friend and journalist, and with a great deal of interest in archaeology in the Middle East, currently lives in Lebanon. And he gave a lecture at La Sierra, and he, without any prompting from us, started his lecture by saying that it's archaeologists like you who are doing archaeology, who are the bridge builders, who are the ambassadors for goodwill. He used the word soft power.
Right.
That's diplo speak, diplomatic speak. But that role is a bridge building role.
Yes, absolutely.
We wish that people in the United States could come to know the Jordanians the way we've come to know them, haven't we? I remember when my daughter and her husband came to dig with us, and they wanted to go downtown. They easily found their way to town, but then they had a hard time getting back to where we were, you know? So they got a taxi and began talking to them and having a good conversation. When they got out at the school where we were staying, they said, now how much do we owe you? Oh, nothing. This is your first time in Jordan, and so Athlon was Athlon, welcome to Jordan, you know? And they said, but that's how you make your living. You can't say nothing. We've got to pay you. No, first time guest. Can you imagine that happening in New York with a taxi driver? No. So we have come to know Arabs through these bridge building ways and find them to be wonderful, hospitable people.
And talking about globality again, when we invest in excavating and unearthing these sites, and we have to be an international partnership in taking care of them.
Right.
We have our local partners, but we need to do something to back them up. Just like I believe Riverside is a kind of a international partner in some way with other international cities. We need to think in those terms. And that is the world we live in. So I'm of the view that yes, many objects were taken back in the colonial days to museums in the West, but as long as we have lots of objects in our universities, as long as we take good care of those and curate them and keep them protected, they belong to humanity, and they don't belong just to America because they are in American soil. It's a new mindset that we realize that we have a common stake in this stewardship of the earth
and
its cultural treasures.
And that we present as many of the shared pasts as we know. It's not that we focus only on one. That's doing a disservice, I mean, to artifacts like this, to sites like we find, if in fact we only have one line on them. That's what globality is doing to us.
Yes, it is.
And that's what your point is.
Right.
So let's look at a couple more slides.
Well, this is actually a very interesting quote that was almost 20 years ago, but a historian by the name of Michael Geyer and also Charles Bright made a very interesting observation about the kind of history that we write. And it comes back to what I was saying about our desired past not going beyond our civilization. What he writes is that what we have before us as contemporary history grates against the familiar explanatory strategies and analytic categories with which scholars have traditionally worked. This is a crisis, above all, of Western imaginings, but it poses profound challenges for any historian. The world we live in has come into its own as an integrated globe, yet it lacks narration and has no history. We have history of civilization, but no history of the whole globe. The central challenge of a renewed world history at the end of the 20th century is to narrate the world's past in an age of globality. And that is the project within which we now wish to ensconce our work, which started with a very particular desired past, which still is important, but it is part of a much bigger past.
I really appreciate your reading the whole thing. I mean, it's fine print. But not only that, that was an important citation for, which has set us off on a new adventure. And let's think of it as a new adventure.
It is.
It's not just world history anymore. It is Okay, I'm going to get used to using the word globality. That's not on my normal vocabulary list, but I'm going to learn it.
I would just like to add, too, that as we now work to preserve and protect our sites, they become outdoor classrooms for the children and the university students of Jordan to hear a new story, which is just not a story about conflict between religions, but a story about the common commitment that we must have to being stewards of the earth as a whole. And that is something that I think might be important to breaking down the prejudices. I'm not naive. It's not going to happen overnight, but we need a new narrative.
And we are, after all, working where the three monotheistic religions began.
Exactly.
Right? It's this very cradle that birthed those.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is one of the centers for advanced study in Norway, where I had the privilege of spending a year.
You spent a year, and you worked with what kind of specialists?
A group of colleagues from history, theology, archaeology, sociology, and
anything in religion?
Studies. And yeah, several from religion. Yeah, but the project was precisely this. It was about imagining a new narrative for the Levant, just like we've been talking about. And we had a wonderful year of full support from the Norwegian government. For 10 months, they put us up in wonderful apartments and allowed us to just focus on this theme.
The Europeans do that better than Americans.
They do a marvelous job of that. Yeah.
And what can you do today in globality? How can you do anything without this kind of collaboration?
That's correct.
Nobody has the capacity to do all of this on their own.
No.
Maybe in the past, people could command large areas of knowledge, but that's impossible anymore.
No.
So we depend on collaboration. Maybe, let me go to the next one, Stan. This is a slide that we showed earlier. Hespan, and then on the map, again, a fairly small map, at a major crossroads.
Right.
What?
Right.
Three continents.
Three continents
we're talking
are
about.
linked together. So we are beautifully positioned to tell the story of a node, if you wish, in a global whole, which happens to be a node of great importance to lovers of the Bible, as well as to Muslims and to other people.
And we could, of course, put Madaba Plains Project, because it's the synergy of this larger project that allows us to be more global.
Yeah.
And each of those names belong to the site at a different period in history.
Correct.
So Heshbon is the name you find in the Bible.
Yeah.
Espus is the name that you find during the classical period. In fact, we have a coin that was minted at Espus and has that name. And Husban is what the people there call it today. And when we add the word tel in front of it, it indicates that this is an archaeological site. So,
and often spelled with an I now.
Yes.
Tel Hispan. T-A-L-L. But those are language changes over time, and we adjust to those. And then if we think about the site itself, I mean, we could spend some time kind of reflecting on the sorts of things we want to do to tell that global story. We've done that in another program, and probably with greater detail. But I did want to put now a picture to the words we've just been talking about with the larger projects. Because now it's a region. Okay, so it's not just an archaeological square. It's not a site. It's not three sites. It's a region. And we will learn more in terms of global.
And this was done very intentionally on our part. Remember, after we finished the first phase at Hespan, we all sat down and we said, what shall we do next? Shall we go to some, across the river? Shall we go to some other country? Shall we go south? And we said, you know, we've invested a lot of time here. We've gotten acquainted with this specific area. Let's continue to work and dig at some other sites in the area and multiply the knowledge about this specific area.
And by being there over these 40 years, we have learned so much, for example, about the pottery that allows us to now, even in the Islamic period, which we knew nothing about practically back in the 70s, now we can separate each century in the Islamic period. We can do the same. We couldn't separate Moabites and Edomites back when we started, but we can do that now.
Reviewers have said that Hespan has become the type site for the Islamic period.
That's
in
correct.
terms of those separations.
That's correct,
Right.
yeah.
And I think I saw something, this might be gloating just a bit, where Mary has been cited as a type site for the Iron Age.
The Pompeii of the Iron Age.
Okay, see, all right. We'll keep working.
And as long as we're gloating, we might as well say we got an award for the publication of this work as the best scholarly work this last year.
Over a couple of years.
Over a couple
actually.
of years,
So
yeah.
that's correct. This last slide, narrative templates. I don't know if you want to say something more about this.
I think we've pretty well talked about it, but I
Right.
mean, when we do our interpretation of the past, we need to be aware of the assumptions that we come with, the narrative templates.
Right.
And that is really what we've been, the desired past discussion that
Now
we've had.
let me push it in a different direction now with cultural memory.
Yeah.
That's a big item in a lot of research, cultural
Yeah.
anthropology.
Yeah.
So is it possible that cultural memory from different time periods would affect the way texts come to us?
I think without
whether
doubt.
it's sacred text, we think about the Bible, Old and New Testament,
Right.
Or political text,
Yeah.
especially political text probably, or tax receipts or whatever. So what is cultural memory, and how can that
I think
help
a
us?
wonderful example of that is the story in the Bible about King Sihon, king of Heshbon. There's no doubt that there must have been some event with a Sihon that made the Bible writers remember that in some 36 different places.
Yes.
This is a deeply embedded memory. Now, archaeologically, we really cannot say we've found Sihon. We haven't.
Right.
We have found contemporary evidence. People were living there and so forth, but we haven't found. But this is where the limitations of archaeology. We can say quite a lot about these peak periods that we talked about in an earlier
Program,
conversation. But there are many things that we have to really just rely on the text and realize that the text embodies, among other things, these important events that are recalled many times in the Old Testament.
Are recalled over and over
Right.
with different cultural settings
Yes.
and different purposes.
Exactly.
I mean, these are not just thrown out there, let's make sure we've got 26 references here so people remember it.
No.
But they have different contexts
Yeah,
and different
yeah.
purposes. And people are writing these. We think of inspiration of the
sure.
Bible, but it's human beings that are doing this writing.
We can even point to the similarity of the Thanksgiving story, can't we? The Plymouth colony,
Yes.
and the Thanksgiving meal and the help of the Indians and so on. And the story we are told in school as children is something that we all own, whether we come from Ethiopia or from Colombia or from Canada. But it really, as historians have gotten to study it, it's a lot more complex.
It is,
You know,
it is.
we had a simplified story
Yeah.
that has brought us together,
Right.
but there's more to the story as we study about it.
And we will keep working on
And we
it.
will keep working.
Thank you, Larry.
I just
Thank
want
you,
to remember one text. And it's a text about now I forget.
We'll come back to it. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Excavating the Bible. We look forward to next time.